Alright, so I'm going to start out by making a couple of minor changes to the scene setup. I'm going to get rid of the graphite tools because I don't need those. If you go up to the snap setting toggle and right click on it, it brings up the options. I'm going to enable vertex snapping and some grid point snapping. I'm also going to modify my home grid so that the spacing is 100 centimeters. Push up the extent of the grid view in perspective so it stretches out a little bit further. Okay. So now we can start. We're going to create a box, snap it out on the grid points, and bring it out there. Make it around about 200 centimeters or 2 meters, depending on your scene display setup. It could be whatever you want. I tend to work this way because when I'm working with real world units, it just makes things a bit easier further down the track. So this is going to be our first segment of corridor. So this would be the start point for the player. So I'm going to call it corridor seg short. And then I'm going to put a little underscore at the end of it because when I go to instance this or clone it, it's going to append numbers onto the end of that object. So I like that. And now I'm going to add an edit poly modifier over the top of that. And go into polygon mode and grab the front and back faces of it and delete those. And now we have, for all intents and purposes, our first bit of corridor. You may want at this point to select all of the polygons on your model and flip them so that the normals face inward, and that way you won't get any lighting errors or anything like that. But that's not really the point. The point is, now that we have our short segment, by hovering over the edge vertex, and it's also on a grid point, which is handy, it makes it easier to work with, we can hold down shift and move this object and drag it until we find the appropriate spot we want to snap it to, which is at the other end of it. And when it comes up with the clone options, we want to select instance, and let's bump it up to 3 copies. Boom. All well and good. And we can hit S to turn our snapping off right now. So now what we have is a bunch of corridor sections running down this away here. You can see edged faces. So the beauty of working with instance objects is that, let's say I go into edge mode and grab these 2 edges along the side and then use connect to insert another edge along there. I can slide it up and down, but because they're on opposing sides of the object, I don't really want to do that too well, so I'll just go OK. We're not worried about mapping, but if you had, for whatever reason, UV map this box, in fact, that's probably not a bad idea, actually. We'll UV map it and we'll box map it, and bring up your material editor and create a diffuse map, and we want to go to maps and choose checker. Let's set the tiling to, I don't know, 10 by 10 and apply it. We can see the checkers appear on there. Your other option is to use a real world map size, which in this case will mean it looks pretty much identical, but we'll just leave it be for the moment. We're happy with that. We'll grab all of our objects and apply that material to all of them so we can see them. And we've got our UV map thing there. We'll drop it down in the stack below the edit poly, and we can rename any of our modifiers in the stack, which is something not a lot of people do. I don't tend to do it that much, but for the sake of following along, you may want to do this, and you can call that remove end caps. Maybe put an EP at the start so you know it's an edit poly modifier, and that's all well and good. And that will just be our way of holding those 2 ends off. Okay, so we're happy with that. And we'll grab those 2 edges that we created. Let's say we drop them down a little bit there. Oh, you can see the mapping is stretching. Well, one way to get around that is in our edit poly modifier, we can click on preserve UVs, and that will keep us happy so that when we move this, you can see the checkers stay where they want to be, and that's pretty handy. But we don't want to do that yet. We want to add another edit poly over the top, and we can rename this one EP adjust wall profile. Okay. And then we go back into Edge, and it's still got our selection from before. We'll make sure we tick Preserve UVs, and we'll slide those down a little bit. And this will be this will form part of the profile of our walls. So let's grab the 2 bits on the top, go into Scale, and then just ensure that up here in our pivot selection, we have Center Mode enabled. And what that means, I'll just scale this up because you wouldn't have been able to see anything before. And when we scale them, not only does it preserve the UVs and extend them out if need be, but it scales them around the group's center. Whereas if we were to do it from independent ones, scaling along that axis wouldn't do anything because an edge has no width. So, boom, we'll grab that. Oh, yes. And switch to center mode. We'll just bring them in a little bit, create a little sense of claustrophobia there, and perhaps we'll do the same thing for the bottom. Now, you may notice that I'm bringing these in rather than grabbing these edges and scaling them out. And the reason for that is this already has an appropriate width of 200 centimeters or 2 meters or whatever. And if we start to use that as our base unit for building all of these volumes, when we go to put them together in a game engine, it's going to be a lot easier to work with because everything will be uniform. So we'll grab those, scale them in a little bit. Alright. I don't know. I'm not doing this because it's pretty. I'm just doing it because it works. So we have a narrow little walkway with an interesting profile on each wall, which is all well and good. And so that can serve as our first little bit.